Welcome to a special segment of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight, where we look at the state of play at racing from the perspective of those who make their living betting on it. A bit of a crossover between Straight Talk and Bet Doctor. We're speaking to Nick Heathcote and John Walter, who have extensive experience in various aspects of the racing industry, but with a particular focus on form analysis and professional punting and that aspect of the game. It's fair to say of all of those who make their living via the racing industry, that the perspective of the punter is largely ignored. And we're not necessarily just talking about the recreational punter, but those who invest considerable time, effort and professional skill in making it work for them from a commercial and professional point of view. And from my experience, and Tim will probably share the experience as well from our discussions, they're among the most insightful and invested in this whole ecosystem. Nick, thank you so much for joining us, mate. We'll start off with you. You speak to a network of punters a lot every day. What is it do you feel that they are most worried about when it comes to the racing industry?
I think from an overall point of view, the biggest pain point at the moment is twofold, I guess, and the problem is intertwined. I think the programming is a real mess, and that's especially from Wednesday through to Saturday or Sunday. And as a consequence, there's too much of the same racing that's overlapping, and there's too many options for trainers to place their horses. And as a consequence, there's lots of scratchings, there's smaller field size, and then on occasion, there's no third dividend that you can sort of bet into. So in terms of betting options, that also diminishes, and the price to play is quite high. You've seen some pretty good figures around, or pretty bleak figures from a punter's perspective. The over rounds increased from a top fluck point of view from, I guess, 105 to 110. So that's the prices on the fixed odds call throughout the last 30 minutes of betting. And then the over round of markets has also gone up 5% over the last 7 years. And it's quite alarming given that prize money sort of doubled within those last sort of 10 years. So punters are, I guess, doing their bit to bet on the product, but it's still being watered down and the price to pay is too big.
John, we've talked about the issues that are affecting racing and from punters' perspective, we also want to come up with, solutions and, to these problems. But how much has the game changed? You've sort of been focused on it in depth for, I don't know, quite some time. How much has it changed in the competitive nature of the punt?
Yeah, I probably have to go back too far, but when I started it was probably around 2000, and the biggest difference to me is, when it's always been punters versus bookmakers, but back then, some of my best friends were bookmakers, and it was more of a relationship. It was a give and take. You're always trying to beat them, they always trying to beat you, but it was a sort of a more fair playing field. You could work with them. I want to back this horse to win that much. They'd help you get that money on without destroying the price. That's all lost now, with the deterioration of on-course bookmaking, corporates. There's no face to anything. Even when I was working at the corporates, we used to work with clients. The smarter the client, the better for us, to be fair. We could use their information. You could, trade off it. There was, you could make your biggest losers as a winning punter, your biggest winners, really. You could really use their information. That doesn't happen now. So, a bookmaking in totality has completely changed. On course has obviously regressed, and the rise of the corporates, it's sort of a faceless game, and it's just more and more every day. It's becoming more like a sort of a poker machine. It's not. Yeah, it's just it's a completely different game from a betting perspective. It's really hard to explain. So you could be here all day, but that's probably the easiest way to sum it up for me. Is it's not a game of competition in regards to pricing anymore. It's a game of competition in regards to marketing, acquiring clients, squeezing the life out of them as much as you can, and holding the people who may be a danger to you at bay as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, I think it's probably that discussion in it, John, about have bookmakers become little more than marketers. They're marketing companies now as opposed to being bookmakers, and they create a funnel and they drive the punters down there and they incentivize them in different ways. But it's a very different ecosystem than probably the ecosystem that's, that has built us over the last 20 years. And it seems to have become a situation now where you've got a lot of players in the bookmaker market. You've got a lot of smaller players as well as others, and effectively they're using marketing exercises in order to, as you mentioned before, sort of, squeeze the lemon dry.
Exactly, and that's it. It's a numbers game for them, but it's also there's no skill involved from their perspective. It's more your skill is in sort of data maintenance and being on top of who's winning, where they're winning, and sort of restricting people heavily. Not offering the same products to everyone, and then maximizing promotions and and whatever you can offer to the people that you can squeeze out of. And that's obviously like, it feels like a bookmaker bashing competition, sort of, we're talking about there, but it's not really. It's obviously a product of, other, taxes and things that have come into play. But from our perspective, that's where we're at. We've gone from somewhere near the top of the podium, because when the game was built on turnover, the people who were winning or breaking square were highly valuable, because, we could afford to bet week on week on week. We'd keep coming back. We'd turn over the most money. Now that it's built on, you've got to win, what are we going to say now, 10 to 12 to 15% off a client to make them viable, where we've been pushed below the bottom run. Like if someone told bookmakers or PRAs 20 years ago that, Gelco and a bunch of other big syndicates were going to walk away, they'd have a heart attack. They wouldn't know where the next dollar was coming from. Whereas now it's the complete reverse. Those people have pretty much been driven out of the game, and it's all based on recreational punters. They don't believe they're price savvy, so market increases are, not relevant. And yeah, as you said, they're squeezing the life out of the lemon, and it's quickly, I don't know how they're going to regenerate it.
Ron and Nick as well, that there's probably, when we were sort of getting engaged in racing, access to videos was difficult. There's arguably more information out there now, databases, sectional times, that from a young punter's perspective that wants to be engaged, is it still an engaging pastime, I guess, and a good time to be entering it despite all the challenges?
I'd say like 100%. It's there, but I guess the PRAs need to figure out what they want the game to look like and the game to be, because at the moment they seem to be sort of stuck in the middle of nowhere. Like the PRAs are now forcing bookmakers to just cut products off, or it feels like every 3 to 6 months. The latest thing is that the bookmakers don't think it's viable to go up on, I guess, provincial meetings or midweek metro meetings in South Australia and Queensland, for example, until 9 o'clock of, the day of the races. And that's pretty backward thinking. Like if I'm a country punter, I'm sitting at the Ararat pub tab on a Friday night, I don't have any access to my prices until Saturday morning. So I can't take a multi into Collingwood in the football on a Friday night into the first favourite at Ararat. So there's a million use cases that you can say that that's a bad thing for racing, not having the product on the shelf. And my time at corporate bookmaker BetStar before they sold to Ladbrokes was all about getting numbers of markets up so customers could look at those markets and then transact into those markets. So since that time, we've had Top Fluck go. Best of the best is a thing that's pretty much done and dusted as well. And we're sort of back to the future a little bit at the moment. We started off with, a tote solution at 117%. And the next thing that we've got pushed onto us is 122% of the world tote. So we've gone from 117% of one tote, then a best tote and SP product, which is 110%. And then now we're back up to this world tote that we're all meant to try and digest now at 122%. And the world tote and the tote product works for a place like Hong Kong that's got 2 meetings a week, but we're being product to death in Australia. We're getting asked to bet for 5 or 6 days a week, and we're diluting the product. We've gone from, if you have a look at, I guess, the Hong Kong product, it's sort of like NFL. It's the cream of the crop. There's less of it, but it's really done well and it's super professional. But I guess racing's become like a T20, or it's become a cricket type of thing. There's test match, there's cricket, there's this, that, and the other. So as a young person, I guess they're finding it hard to follow a lot of it that's non-premium, but we seem to be wasting a lot of prize money and resource at this non-premium product level. And it just creates probably a bigger wastage problem within the industry, because you need those horses to keep topping up. So we're just in this vicious cycle of chasing our tail around. But we call it the great game and we joke about it because it's the ultimate puzzle. Like, it's so more exhilarating and exciting. And, if you were there at Eagle Farm, you could just see that the life in the track is still there, but the PREs need to decide what they want this game to look like. So it's on them, but bookies and punters will react based on what they do and say.
What's interesting, you talk about a couple of the alternatives. We talk about the issues with the corporate bookmaking system, and there's probably a couple of alternatives. You've spoken about tote, and we'll get back into that a bit more in a minute about whether that's a saviour. But interested in, feel free, I'll to jump in here on what you feel. Is Betfair savable in Australia? Is the concept of Betfair and the way that it works? Obviously, they're in a situation now where they're doing their best, but they're not thriving, and that's not a go at them. It's just the nature of the taxation system, all that sort of stuff. What would a meaningful exchange do for Australian racing? And is it, do you think it's possible / probable that this would ever happen?
John, do you want to have a first crack at this one?
Can I steer back to the last question for a sec, Does because I'm passionate about it, the engaging young people, and then I'll tackle that one very quickly. But where I want to come from is that I'm probably your ultimate. From 16 years old, I'm an ADHD lunatic, loves sport, loves everything. I tackled the hardest, anything golf, the hardest games that you could find, I became obsessed with. And when I found racing, I went on track every day, 5 years, anyone I could talk to, any bit of information I could suck out of anyone. And like Nick's saying now, if you go to a racetrack, there's no personnel, there's nothing left. So it's on people like us to do that now. And the sort of headwinds we face to try and educate young people as opposed to the people they embrace. And I'm not having a crack at Benny Scarf because he's just the name that's there now at the moment. He's not exactly educating. He's not exactly helping people understand racing, want to become involved. He's putting the spotlight on it, which is good. But we need to sort of drive kids and, well, not kids, young people through into people like us who want to help pass on what we know. And like I used to pay $1,500 a month for videos. That's all available now. Why are the PRAs not investing in making that sort of situation available to everyone free? Those sorts of things are things I would be fighting. That'd be a number one priority from them, is trying to, suck the minds of people like us. How did we learn? Because it is a different game now. People aren't going to be on track every day, but we have this sort of situation where you can tap into anyone's mind from anywhere in the world. So it should be easier to learn and grow the game, but we're sort of fighting again. The people that are trying to help are sort of being put on the back burner. It's really tough. But anyway, I just had to have a whinge there. And
onto the Betfair stuff now. Is Betfair savable? That's probably the key question.
Absolutely it is. And it's 100% and has been since probably 2006. They've been sort of, for whatever reason, put under the thumb is probably the best way to say it. The tax structure has been absolutely ridiculous, since day one. And when they were
demonised since day one, John, too. They were demonised particularly by key figures like the Landys and stuff from the very start, weren't they?
It has, and it did. I hate bringing his name into things too much because people who know me or don't know me probably think I've got a personal issue with him, but he was the sort of outspoken person at the start who was, whoa, be careful with Betfair. Whereas, from my perspective, PRAs are there to give not just participants the best product available, but punters as well, because we fund it. So to me, you're given an exchange which is pure. It's 101, 101 and a half or something when they first came out was the market, and you're getting full transparency. They can see all the bets. There's no issue there. Laying was obviously a little bit scary, but once everyone got to sort of their head around it, it went away. So why are you penalising these guys for unfair taxes? They're taxed like they're a bookmaker from day one. And when you stack these taxes on top, I think, we're talking to corporates about 10 to 12% of every dollar struck is lost in taxes. Betfair's about 80. Their commission they lose on every bet taken or every winning bet is 80% lost before expenses. So, they've had to raise from 5 to 10. They've had to put in these premium charges, which has driven away a lot of the market sort of seeding players, all the big syndicates, anyone who's put money into this at their own risk are sort of walking away because there's no reward. So, it is the one part of the industry. The tote's another one, obviously, which we'll probably talk about. But if you rationalize the taxing structure and just bought in a race field or one tax, whatever you call it, they can't have POC. It just can't. It just doesn't adapt to the Betfair model. It cannot be applicable to Betfair. A GST is fine. And if the race fields were done on a commission, not on turnover, it's back to a thriving model. And, I would have taken it one step further if I was PRA. I would have operated it myself and tried to bring it down to even less of a commission. But if you bring it back down to, say, a 5% base, and then, if you're a bigger player, you can reduce it even further. It's overnight, it becomes somewhere where everyone can play. And it also is another place where bookmakers can bet back. It promotes flowing of money through the entire industry, not just professional punters. It's a great product for recreational punters and creates a huge flow of money through the entire ecosystem.
I think the PREs need to recognise that it's not going to be a threat to a viable product for recreational customers. No one's mastered the Betfair interface for recreational customers, and I can't see it changing. Like, it's not a multi-product. It's not something like the Dabble's got. It's never going to have the tech sophistication that Ladbrokes or Sportsbet have. So those customers are still going to be ring-fenced with the corporate dollar, and that's going to be fine. So, yeah, was it a threat to the, I guess, tote pools? Yeah, potentially it is. But they've got the oversight there, though, with Betfair, because all those customers are KYC properly. All the AML is perfect, and they've got that beautiful oversight on where all the money comes from. Whereas when you look at the tote product as a comparison, you've got Citybet, and it's so dark and murky. So I can't fathom why it's not embraced from that point of view.
On the tote, it's been promised for a long time that Tabcorp are looking at fixing it and working with governments, and Gillan McLaughlin's obviously come in last year and said the same thing. Is there a future? Is it a myth, the tote, pari-mutuel betting in Australia?
I'll go first, Nick. You want me to tackle it? I'll tackle it. I love the tote. Yeah, obviously the corporates eroding the tote's been a huge issue. Again, it feels like the PRAs are well and truly too involved with the way that the totes are even run. It feels like they're sort of oversight, or they're the board on all of these issues. It's very weird. Like, even they're coming out with products and things, it's strange. And it just feels like that, talking exotics, number one, that the corporates have completely obliterated the exotic pools from our perspective. They're non-existent. They used to have jackpots and things. The roundings used to be returned to punters through jackpots. That was there was legislation passed, whereas they can absorb that. That was another bad decision I thought from them, because jackpots again creates liquidity, creates flow of money, and in its current form, they're basically not competitive. So there has to be change, and the only ways, from my idea, that you could change is competitive nature. You drop takeouts of the tote. That's the only way that you could become any sort of competitive with the corporates, or you lobby the PRAs to make the corporates push money back into the totes forcibly. So any product that is of the tabs, the dividend is owned by the tab, they have to put the money back into the tote. That may be restricted to just exotics, which would make a lot more sense. And they're rewarded with, a healthy commission for doing so. And again, that instantly brings everyone back into play. It brings all the big syndicates, the middle ground players, the guys who break even over the year. They've again got somewhere to play. Whereas, at the moment, I couldn't place an exotic bet to win anything really with 99% of them, and maybe one or two corporates will take a small exotic bet. The rest won't even offer it. So to me, exotic betting, which was a huge part of my betting, is completely out the window. So there are ways to revive it instantly. And sort of Nick touched on it before. The world tote would be the nail in the coffin from my perspective, because it would just fall in line with all their other products. It would put competition again out the window. Your numbers are rising to 122 plus. Your best tote would disappear. Your exotics on the majority of racing would be gone. It'd be only sort of select rate. It'd be diabolical. One tote in its current format, or a higher takeout. If they reduced takeouts and sort of reformed everything, absolutely it would be viable. But if they're heading down the way it looks like, it's probably the end of the tote.
Yeah, I'd probably say that it looks like a massive missed opportunity from Tab on their exotic pools. Like the stories around the quaddie. There was a great quaddie that hit at Flemington about a month ago.
Yep.
When it had all those, that should have been the biggest story going around. And I guess the current customer is chasing these small investments to these big wins with the same game multi. You see them all through social media. Everyone loves having these 5, 6, 10 legger. There's the heartache story. I've just got nutted by A, B, C, D. So how Tabcorp haven't reclaimed the exotics and worked something incorporating the quaddie into their story and who they are as a company is another one that it's a massive area of opportunity. You look at Gillen's, he thinks that the panacea could be the pub tabs. Well, your point of difference and who you are is your tote pools, and more importantly, the quaddies. Like, you guys need to, champion that. But it just seems to be missed by the marketing team and the powers that be.
they need to own something, don't they? Because at the moment they're like the red-headed little stepchild in every way, whether it be toe price, exotics, pools, everything is smaller. So why would anyone bet with them that's not completely rusted on condition to bet with them for the last 30, 40 years, and slowly they're dying out, and Sportsbet and Ladbrokes and everyone with the marketing power absorbing all the new customers. So they're going to slowly die out unless they have a point of difference. And like I said, Nick, huge incentive, low outlay, high potential return products. And we could even go down the path of, introducing more of them. I would for sure.
And that's the other thing, like ATC are tied to Tabcorp, and here we are, like they haven't got the funding because that's how the model's working up in New South Wales. Racing New South Wales playing God, and ATC has to rely on this antiquated tote funding model or the TAB funding model, and it's just losing market share by the day. So it's insane.
You're listening to a special segment of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight. We've been joined today by Nick Heathcote and John Walter. We'll just take a short break, gentlemen, and we'll be back in a minute. Welcome back to a special segment of Straight Talk with Bren O'Brien and Tim Rowe from The Straight. We're joined by Nick Heathcote and John Walter, discussing a variety of challenges around the wagering landscape and how it affects racing. And we've discussed the specifics of wagering, obviously, and the betting landscape and the punting landscape, and it's something you guys are obviously very much aware of day to day. But what fascinates me about this, guys, is, I talk to similar guys in your position. I talk to you guys, I talk to other people around about your passion and knowledge of racing, and that, I guess, your willingness to be open and have conversations around what you think could be done better. Not necessarily saying you guys are all wrong and we're all right, but actually your passion for the game and your interest in seeing the game continue. I wanted to have a quick chat with you guys about prize money. It was alluded to before, and the challenge that we've got in Australia at the moment. There's an article in The Straight this week around about Chris Waller, even, who's derived $450 million in prize money in the last 10 years out of Australian racing, saying it's time we sort of have a look at prize money and start thinking about other priorities within racing. What have you guys seen? John, I'll start off with you because I know you've got some thoughts around this. What have you guys seen as being the sort of the impact of this long period of forever increasing prize money over the past 10 years?
So I'm sort of in a unique spot where I was a rider's agent for a majority of it and got to deal with a lot of trainers. Number one, it's not just prize money. It's definitely sort of the COVID period, cost of living, everything's gone. It's definitely a perfect storm to make it a diabolical time for to be a trainer at the moment. And I really think it's important that people like Chris come out, because I was close friends with Chris when he first came out here, and I can promise you they couldn't put petrol in the car. They really struggle. He might have 5 or 6 horses. They were praying, for results to make their business viable, to stay afloat. So, and he doesn't have a short memory. He understands what it's like to be at the bottom of the totem pole. So, it's important that people like him come out and speak. But yeah, you look at, I just did some figures in there. Some of them are old, some of them are new, because Racing New South Wales aren't that transparent with a lot of their figures. But yeah, so the 28% of money going to 100 million, mega races, 500,000 and above, 35%. So, sort of 63% going to metropolitan racing, 10 to provincial, and then 27 to country racing. Doesn't sound that bad until, again, the numbers may be out, but it was sort of 75% of trainers are country trainers, and provincial 16, only 8.5% metro. So the money doesn't get evenly dispersed.
I'll add to that too, John, that the ATC collect only 48% of wagering revenue in New South Wales. So they actually collect a minority of wagering revenue. So if you're benchmarking based upon wagering performance and you're lining up to prize money, it doesn't seem to make sense, does it?
It doesn't, and it's survival. It really is. Like, at this point in time, I would say, to keep it as simple as possible, 99% of trainers try to align their costs to owners to break square, and then they make money from prize money. And at the moment, country trainers, the costs, I would say, we had a lot. I probably had 10 to 12 horses in work there at the start of COVID. I honestly don't see a point in having one now with a country trainer. It's just too expensive. It's probably gone up 50 to 60% in cost, and and you don't get anything else for it. And the trainers are now, not only they're getting priced out of the market from a yielding perspective, being able to sort of turn horses over, they're finding, a bigger rate of bad debt and everything that comes because you're dealing with horses that are on that merry-go-round we talked about, stuck in the benchmark 58 loop. and they struggle to pay for themselves. So it's becoming more expensive for owners. Trainers can't afford to charge what they need to stay alive, and the prize money doesn't compensate them anywhere near what it needs to. And you've also got, metropolitan trainers, everything, we'll touch on that later as well, sort of mega stables and what they're doing to sort of country racing as well, what they're taking out of it. So yeah, it's very top heavy, and the little guys, and I'm not talking just country trainers, country, provincial, and I would say 80% of metropolitan trainers are completely and utterly under the pump. And prize money's not all about that, but it's just the overspend, and where it could be sort of redirected is definitely a big issue, I would say.
Yeah, and I think that if you go back and dig out the figures, it all aligns, and it all started when TVN ceased to exist and collapsed. So then New South Wales wanted to pump up their own tyres and reach parity and do all these sort of things. But as John's already alluded to, like, that's a bit of a running joke within betting circles, these $1 million Group 1, $1 million pop-up mile races that you have in New South Wales. Like, there's a new one every week, and none of it even means anything, and it's the same horses, and even the horses and the trainers just seem to be misplaced and sort of burning themselves out, where, if you compare the two Goliaths that sort of set the tone with things, Victoria has always been, I guess, the number one and top dog. And in that time, they've seemed to invest more into their tracks. They've built Pakenham, which is a pretty good facility at the moment. They've replaced a lot of the metal running rails, and their upkeep on tracks, barring, maybe Benalla and a handful of tracks, they're in really good condition. And I guess punters, as you know, probably if you're betting in the Queensland racing at the moment, if you don't have good racing surfaces, you've got nothing. Just ask, I guess, the Gold Coast Turf Club how important tracks are and track preparation there. Like, it's your be all end all. And if you haven't got your tracks in great condition, yeah, you're really behind the eight ball. And yeah, I just think that it's great to hear Chris talk about the prize money, and I guess it's taken the Rose Hill sale for everyone to sort of be brought up to speed, or to pause for a little bit and think, hey, how did we get to this position, and what are the figures and what are the details around this? Because COVID definitely provided the false economy. But if you listen to, I guess, the Betfairs of the world, the Tristan Merlehans of the world, and most of the smart punters like Daniel O'Sullivan, like John, and anyone with any sort of platform, these labour pains they're sort of 7 years old. Like, everyone's forecasted this big bubble to burst. COVID, I guess, caused the fake economy, and then now we're sort of getting back to where things were. And I guess it's advantage Victoria at the moment because they've already, I guess, seeded some really good tracks like Pakenham. They've got the investment up at near the Inglis sale out there, and they're a couple of steps ahead, and they're also a couple of steps ahead because they've put a pause on the prize money. They don't have this big glut of races that John's alluded to and all these pop-up things that New South Wales need to sort of address, because it's going to run out. And I guess it's perhaps a saviour of potentially the whole industry, the no vote with Rose Hill, in my opinion. If the yes vote had gone ahead, there'd be no stopping New South Wales spending spree, and it would have been a bigger bubble, and it would have been further down the line.
John, you mentioned that you owned a lot of horses, you dealt with, as a jockey manager, dealt with trainers. I guess the art of placement and also just the benchmarking system or the programming in New South Wales, across the board, but obviously New South Wales with its, and Victoria with the rating systems, can that be changed for the betterment, or have you got a position on programming and how that works?
I've got a position on everything. But yes, and I have. And talking...
That's why we've got you here, John.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I sit here and I talk to myself most of the time, so this is always fun. But yeah, well, we used to buy the horses. We used to buy maidens particularly, or if we bought sort of for two reasons. Maidens, we think, sort of had been misrepaired or whatever, or this is usually through English secondhand. We bought yearlings as well for country trainers, but mainly sort of through secondhand markets, or we bought horses to sort of aim towards country championships. They were sort of unchained. Everything was okay with them because you knew that they were a better class in the area. You were expecting them to travel. But buying horses, particularly sort of maidens or lower grade horses for country areas, became obsolete because they're pushing actively any horse that shows any sort of ability away from its area when they're trained in the country. They're pushed towards provincial city training straight away. If you get an impressive winner of one of these $50,000 maidens somewhere, they straight away get a benchmark that basically puts them sort of midweek in town. And that's no fun for the people I was placing in horses who wanted to see their horses race at, Wagga or Tamworth or Leeton or somewhere like that. It's impossible for these country owners to get the value out of their product to bother, being repeat buyers. And you can't sort of turn over horses, which we love to do. As soon as a horse sort of reached its mark or whatever ability-wise, we would buy them a new one. We would sell, buy a new one. As soon as the class structures disappeared and it's benchmarking, and or you've got 90% of your races are benchmark 58 and below, it just becomes a waste of time and a waste of money, and it's just not fun for anyone involved, including the trainers. They end up with 20 horses in work, 18 of them are stuck on the merry-go-round. It doesn't make any sense. You need to return a structure of a stepping stone structure that they can progress through to allow them to, even if they're only got a lower class of horse, progress through their grades in their area.
I'd agree with that, John. I know with horses I've owned, and over the time, so quite often you're better off giving that horse, I'm not saying you're running it dead, far from it, but giving it 5 or 6 runs in a maiden. You don't want it to win impressively on debut, even though it's got ability and will win a few races. You want it, so when you do win your maiden, you only can go to, maybe a rating 54, then you can win a couple of 58s, but if you go straight to a 58 rating, or you're in trouble. And the same with the city trainers targeting the Oranges and Bathurst, because they know they're better off winning a maiden there to get a lower rating than winning a provincial maiden. It's quite, those that are blowing up, going to the country, well, those trainers aren't doing their owners a service if they are going and winning provincials with a limited horse.
You're literally burning money. As a trainer, you're literally burning money if you do it any other way. And I would say that Bjorn Baker's probably the smartest operator now. He may be a little bit ruthless, but for his ownership, he's the smartest operator. Especially when he works with these Derby horses. You see horses like, is it Overpass? I think he started at Orange in a maiden. Steffi Magnetica, I think she won a couple of races at sort of Bathurst Orange. And it's not a coincidence. He uses these big country tracks to sort of blood them, whether it's Goulburn or, they're very nice places to send your horses, number one, to have a good experience, trip away. Like you say, you get the result, you don't get the punishment from the benchmark. The money's not too dissimilar at that low level, and you can progress. But, poor old whoever's stabled it, wherever that country meeting is trying to do their best with their limited opportunities, is up against whether it's Annabelle, Björn, or somebody similar. So, you can't really knock them because they're doing the right thing by their owners, but it's not a level playing field for the country trainers, that's for sure.
Yeah, I just want to sort of point about that too. Like, the trainers are using the system as best they can, and they're utilising it in order to facilitate the best outcomes for them. So, if we talk about the mega stables, and we get onto that now, and where we're at with that, and the challenges that we've got around that, not a shot at Chris Waller, but Chris Waller had 30 starters across the weekend, didn't get a winner, but gained $140,000 in prize money. Now, that's not a bad day's work for most of us to bank that. Now, that's not, I'm not saying Chris is gaming the system, but he knows that with scale, it can work. Him and King, both Kieran Maher and Chris Waller have both had over 2,000 starters this season, and both are currently got their worst strike rate winning percentages in over 10 years. So we're in a situation where I'm not bagging them, I'm just saying that they don't get. Both of those guys will break the prize money record for Australia for a trainer this year. Both are over $50 million already, because scale works. Now, and that's why Annabelle and Rob are going down the same path, and that's why others are going down the same path. And that's fine. They are working the system. But I guess the question is, and Nick, I'll get you on this first because, John's taken the new ball a fair bit on this stuff. Do we need to make significant change? There's discussion about restricting stable numbers, all that type of stuff. Would that work? Do we need a more restrictive system, or do we need to incentivize trainers to behave in a different way?
I think it probably is a better look for the game. I think Kieran's right-hand man, I think his name's Jack Turnbull, and Ben that used to work for Kieran that moved on to Tiarco Racing and things like that. These guys look like they're going to be great trainers in their own right. It provides a really good career path, and from a racing perspective, it's better optics too. Like, do you want to bet against 3 or 4 Kieran Maher runners in a race, or 3 or 4 Chris Waller runners, or would you rather see like a Jack Turnbull or one of their foremen sort of move out? Like Paul Shaler's moved away from Chris Waller and he's starting his own brand. Like, is it going to be a better story that Paul Shaler is the next big trainer in Brisbane rather than and someone to sort of go head to head with a Tony Gollan? For the narrative of racing, I think it's a really bad thing, and I think probably John's more across it because he's been involved with, I guess, racing and syndicating horses in the country areas. But I think it'd help the flow of horses if there's a stable cap on Chris Waller only allowed to have sort of 150 horses in work. Well, surely the poorer horses end up going to, the Cody Morgans or the Adam Camdens at the Gold Coast or the Declan Mars or whoever they are, and then that person can engage their own community at the Gold Coast or at Ballarat or at Tamworth and grow that industry and grow the people around there. And people, they'd rather see the person. How many times would Bjorn have been available for the people at Orange or Tamworth rather than, a Matt Griffith or an Adam Campton or a Matty Sears or something like that at Toowoomba? I think for the grassroots people that they need faces and people that they can identify with, and we need more young people under their own brand and banner coming through the sport. Aquanita wasn't the best business model out there, but they all had their own different name. Like if Aquanita just was a Robert Smurden, that would have been terrible. At least they had, 4 or 5 different trainers that could operate under that umbrella. So maybe the racing PRAs need to help them from a management point of view, because it seems like Waller and Annabelle and co have all figured out the back end of it. But, maybe it is time for the Jack Turnbulls to, step out of those shadows. But, yeah, it could only be a positive, I would have thought. But the flow of horses needs to change dramatically as well. We've got this oversupply problem, but the money's not moving in betting and the horses aren't moving enough in the training ranks. John?
Yeah, it's a big one, right? And most of those points Nick's brought up, I 100% agree with. And again, sort of what we talked about with bookmaking, competition in training is dying as well. The gap is too big between Chris Waller, Kieran Maher, and Annabelle, and the rest. And it's not, as you said, their strike rates are poor. So from a punter's perspective, it's a nightmare. And from the lesser trainers' perspective, they can't get hold of a horse. There was a question, sort of about horsemanship, and is it lost? I think at one point. It is to a certain degree. Like back in the day, a trainer was more, you selected a trainer on his horsemanship, on his how he could train on set a horse, and it was to do with betting and all these things. That is all completely lost now. It's more about marketing, social media, and attracting owners to, to moths to a flame. It's not about horsemanship. It's completely lost. And again, the country, it's even more like you've got Annabelle coming into Scone. I think that was one of the worst things that ever happened to racing in New South Wales ever since. And no personal attack on Annabelle. Again, she's trying to do the best for her ownership group. She's bringing the cost down to some degree because she can go in there and she can charge more. She can pay more to any stable rider, any person who's working, stable hand, anyone in there. She can cut everyone in the place, and which brings their costs up. All the other trainers that surrounded them that had, good work riders or whatever, all of a sudden they're battling either they've got to pay them more to keep them or they've lost them. They're obviously losing owners as well naturally because they say, oh, Annabelle flashy as opposed to next door. So they're losing owners. They're paying more for what they had. They're losing staff. They end up as basically pre-trainers to survive to the mega stables. And that's just a horrible situation for mine. I thought that was one of the worst decisions I've ever seen, allowing that to happen. It also, it increases the prices of bloodstock. There's no doubt that these mega stables do that. They drive the price of everything up naturally. And again, that's another bad thing. Offsetting that, I agree. The skill set of trainers has to change, but, maybe it's a good time to do two things. Bringing numbers back to a competitive level, like sort of Hong Kong, like we're talking about. And funnily, the last trainer I would give a horse to, because I know he would know every horse in his stable, would be Mark Newnham. And it's not a coincidence that he's gone to Hong Kong and he's thriving. And I speak to him still quite often, and just the joy of everything he does over there. He doesn't have to worry about billing because the Hong Kong Jockey Club take care of it. He can be a horseman. He can take care of his 50, 60, 70 horses. There's still high pressure on him to select those horses well. He's got to place them well. He's got to make sure he's got the right owners around him. None of these things would be going through the minds of these mega stables. It's just all about numbers. And like Chris Waller did it really well. I think he built it up over 10, 15, 20 years. It took him forever to put a stable up at the Gold Coast. He was only in town. I think he's done it the right way. Did he sort of create a path and then Kieran and Annabelle have taken a run with it? Absolutely. Do I agree with the way they've done it? Absolutely not. And I do think that, Nick said, that a lot of the foremen for Kieran will be sort of lost in translation. No one will even know they're faceless. And if you rang and picking on Kieran and said, listen, do you know how Billy Joe's went on work on Tuesday? He'd get his computer up and he'd punch a few numbers and he could probably tell you how it went, but he couldn't tell you if it was black, blue, grey, brown, had 3 legs, 4 legs, 2 heads. He couldn't tell you where or who, 90% of his stable are. And to me, that's not horse training. I think it's a great time where we could really, and it's just to go back again to the Rosehill thing. If they put a mega plan in front of me and said, we're going to sell Rosehill, this is what we're going to fund, we're going to make the whole game professional, we're going to build mega training centres with limited numbers, you've got to earn your way in there, and it becomes, a pathway for aspiring trainers. You've got to go through country, provincial, metropolitan level. You've got to fight your way through at a level playing field with other like-minded people, and restricting the numbers, giving them the most support they can. Like I said, I think PRA should be responsible for all billing either way, which keeps everyone responsible. Owners have to pay their bills. Trainers can't be overcharging. They're aware of how every trainer sits. They're aware of every owner that's got a bad name. They can be sort of looked after. It just creates a much more stable platform for everyone and a more professional one, which is what we want. If you cull, make big decisions, cull a lot of smaller tracks that attract huge overheads. I know, talking to another head of the PRA, he was trying to cull some little tracks in greyhound racing, and the overheads just astronomical compared to what they sort of produce, and yet he still sort of faced a headway to do that, and it didn't happen. But I think big decisions like that need to happen so that we can upgrade all these facilities to something that is on a world-class level, because we have the trainers, we have the jockeys, we have the product, we have the racetracks. We've just got too much, and it is diluted. And if we concentrate it and really put our heads together and build something, that's a competitive, high level, high standard, we would be a world, power. We would be a superpower. We'd be on Hong Kong on steroids at a country, provincial, and metropolitan level.
I think, playing devil's advocate, I think restraint of trade laws might prevent caps on stables, and as Kieran and Chris are built from the ground up, as we touched on earlier. So it can be done. I agree with you, John, on Mark Newnham. Part of training these days is getting owners and getting a stable to 100 horses, what I'm told is, and to be viable, which is, if a Jack Turnbull, who, did some of his formative years at Charles Sturt University in Wagga, I believe. So, there's hope for he can go, if he wants to go it on his own, but part of it is attracting owners, and he's very well-mannered and well-spoken, so I'm sure he will. And again, defending Kieran, he's phenomenal. As someone said, his body should be donated to science. His memory is phenomenal with horses and different things like that. But moving on, enough of that, on to jockeys. We'll start maybe with you, Nick. The training of jockeys, obviously, as we all know, it's an incredibly dangerous profession. Is there enough investment in attracting jockeys and skilling them enough to ride in races, get the job done, but also be safe enough and limit the prospect of injuries, I guess?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not going to speak about something I don't know enough of and haven't seen the figures, but in terms of quality of riders, I think, we've got too much racing to possibly be able to keep up with the level of skill and training required from a betting perspective. Like, I watch a lot of racing and do lots of video analysis that forms a high percentage of my bets. And some of the things I see are insane and crazy, but I guess the stewards are on to probably 85% of those. So I think the stewards are doing enough to keep racing safe. But in terms of investment and training and skill, I can't talk to that, but I'm sure John's got more oversight on that.
I'll talk to it. From an income perspective, they're the biggest winners out of everything that's happened in racing in the last 10 years. They are the winners. They're the ones who just sit in the background, and every time prize money's increased, anything's increased, they're the winner, which is fine, to be honest. But they're never going to come out and sort of argue against anything, that's for sure. The risks are there, and they work too hard. And I agree with Nick from that perspective. There's just too much product, and it's all reliant on this group to be there and show up. Some of the things I think that are issues, because I don't think they're being nurtured at all. People are getting bigger, rising weights, and I think it's like an 80%, 80-20, maybe higher, female apprentices to male apprentices. And that's, 99% of the greatest jockeys of all time are men. Maybe they've been given better opportunities. That's not the argument we're having here. I do think we need to do whatever we can to at least even those numbers up, because it's a physical, attribute that can't be changed. You look at Aaron Bullock's probably, the number one jockey in New South Wales wins wise. James McDonald, obviously might have a little argument with that about who's the best jockey. I'm not having that argument, but he misses so many engagements because he can't maintain his weight to a level of sort of 57, 58 kilos. And if he was lost to the industry completely, I can see why he gets a little bit of arguable leniency, because he's such a prime attribute, and he's nearly forced out of the game. He has to, absolutely torture himself on a daily basis to maintain a high level of weight. So anything that can be help to alleviate that in a common sense manner, I think needs to happen. Yeah, the lack of training of jockeys as well is a completely different argument. I think, when it comes to the way I actually put it to them, I never got an answer, you wouldn't believe it, saying that I think all jockeys should be trained from a punter's perspective. And, straight away I was looked at like I was told, you're trying to corrupt jockeys at a young age. I'm trying to get them to see races through my eyes. And in a quick way, if you're looking at understanding that the horse that you're sitting on is limited in a certain way, the other horses around you are limited in certain ways. If you can analyze a race by looking at not only sort of tempo, bias, the things that everyone looks at, but your opposition, how to sort of weaken them, how to make the best of your horse. That's all I ever did with the jockeys I ever worked with. I would only interrupt or talk to them about a race if I said, listen, this horse you're on, it's only, it's one paced, you need to take off a little bit earlier, favourite won't be able to go with you, things like that. Just a sort of information that I could give them, and slowly they would start to give it back because they would start to understand it, because they'd never really been spoken to that way, but they enjoy it. They enjoy investigating races using their own sort of ability once you sort of give them little bits and pieces. And I don't think anyone's doing that, whether, they might be helping them with their riding style and things like that. That's the stuff that I can't really talk to. But I do see a lot of jockeys, younger jockeys especially, that are quite weak. And I know it takes, time, but I think huge part of the, physical, whether it's polite, they need as much help as they can get with the physical preparation and dietary things. But none of that can be actually implemented correctly unless you bring back the amount of riding they have to do, because it's impossible. It's impossible to maintain a healthy body, healthy mind, prepare for races if you're riding 7 days a week, and that's sometimes track work, trials, and straight to the races. It's impossible to do all of that and be a healthy person and be prepared and do the best for, the punters and owners and trainers if you're overworked. So, I think they definitely need to be, from a compensation perspective, they're well looked after, but I don't think the industry itself is doing anything near what it needs to be doing to elevate jockeys to the levels that they can get to. There's a lot more ability out there that's not being maximised.
I think, really look at the best jockeys and what makes them great jockeys. Obviously, they've got the physical attributes, but it's the mental attributes. If you look at the greatest jockeys, if you look at the ones now, you've got James McDonald or Zach Purton, these guys. Like Zach Purton is an extraordinary case of someone who's a raw, amazing competitor. He's these aspects around about, I guess, the trade and what they learn and how they apply that, once they had developed the physical skills, are a really key part of, developing these guys. And they are extremely high profile and arguably close to the highest profile, probably higher profile than trainers in terms of, their role in promoting the sport more broadly and people understanding how it works. So I think what's fundamental about all the things we're talking about here, and bringing it sort of back, trying to bring it back a bit more, is, are we improving? What are we improving in this, in the industry across the board? Tim and I spend a lot of time in the breeding and bloodstock game. It's kind of interesting spending time in that wagering space, talking to people like you and also talking to people in the breeding and bloodstock space. Very educated people in all different ways. The issues around scale, Tim, you'd agree, the issues around scale are a massive issue within the breeding industry at the moment. Small breeders are leaving in droves. We have a situation where not only is the foal crop dropping, but we've got, the number of breeders. And we're seeing, and Tim, you can just speak to this briefly, but we're seeing some really highly skilled people considering exiting the game because, they can't operate at the scale they need to make the economics work.
That's right. It's, you need, the way the market is now, it's, very going to the top, isn't it? So you need high quality mares, and who can afford to buy them? Not not many people. Again, it's probably like owning a horse now with country trainers. It's, it's expensive, and then even then your only likelihood of getting the best mares is very difficult. You're trying to beat the odds which are already stacked against you. So that's where it's, and because of the inflationary effects over the last 5-6 years, it's just service fees, just probably more so the production costs are just, you can't beat that. It's too hard to keep beating your head against a wall and losing money year after year. Sometimes you just, I'm better off doing something else, unfortunately.
Yeah, and there's a guy that we'll deal with, and I'll name who it is, David Wishaw from Armadale Startup in Tassie. That stud's been in the family for 3 or 4 generations, and they've obviously just taken on board a new stallion now. Good on them for taking a risk on that. But Dave's been told by everyone he's mad for doing so, and why would you do it? Because, you're not going to make your money back and whatever else. But he said to me, he goes, if I don't make these decisions, which on a business perspective might not seem the most rational, but from a personal perspective around the racing, he goes, in 6 years' time, this will be a beef farm. This will be, and that's the reality of it, that the farms, and we're seeing it across the board. If you only got to look in the real estate section to see how many farms in northern Victoria, around the outskirts of Melbourne, even Hunter Valley, all that sort of stuff, Tim, you keep a pretty close eye on that. How many of those farms are for sale? And we're not talking mega farms. We're talking people who would have had 4 or 5 brood mares or 5 or 6 brood mares, bred a few, send a few to the sales, make a little bit of a commercial return and move on. Those people are just gone, aren't they, Tim?
Clint Donovan, as a lot of people would know, auctioneer Magic Millions, and got his own successful real estate business now. As he says, he started his business at exactly the right time, flying. But he said there's probably farms you wouldn't think would be for sale, but if the right offer came along, definitely would be. It's just because all aspects of racing are difficult to win. That's the part of the beauty of it is, as John would know, the punt. When you do solve that puzzle, yes, you get some money back in your account or it's cash or whatever, but it's incredibly satisfying, I find. And that's same with breeding a nice horse, getting a sale result and, seeing it win. That's part of the challenge. It just takes years to achieve that. And with Dave, your example with Bodyguard, hopefully in 5 years' time, he's made the right call.
Yeah, but it's a risk, and that's the point of it. And I guess they'll be improving. Gents, we'll bring it to a close now. Thanks very much for your time. I guess it's easy to make the case for those within the industry to make the case for how it prospers. But I think they prosper from the disconnect within the game. So the people that run, in my opinion, it's my thoughts, those who run the game prosper for the fact that there's a disconnect between the key elements around, the people who are experts in different aspects of the game. You talk to breeders and bloodstock people as we do, and as I mentioned, they're passionate and knowledgeable about what they do. You talk to guys like you guys in the punting and wagering sector. You talk to people who work in corporate bookmakers who are among the most passionate racing fans you've ever met. You talk to people who work in stables. You talk to trainers who are passionate and driven. There's 1,000 different opinions, but it doesn't mean necessarily they all have to be on opposing sides. And I think probably the divisive nature of the Rose Hill debate for me brought this out. There is so much knowledge across the board. The key, I think, is bringing that knowledge together and everyone having their thoughts and opinions. And maybe you won't agree, and that's fine. It's okay if you don't agree with someone, but at least the idea has been put out there. I think that the solution for the future forward for racing needs to come from outside the tent of the PRAs and the clubs. I think it needs to come from people like you guys, people like us trying to facilitate those discussions, passionate people in the breeding industry, people in the corporate wagering sector, people in the training, in the training operations, all those people to have that discussion, because we all rely upon this industry for a living, but we're also very passionate about it. Yeah, and I think for me that's a really key aspect of that. So, John, Nick, thank you so much for your time. It's been a long discussion, but I think a worthy discussion. It's probably just scratched the surface of many of the things that you guys talk about along the way. Really appreciate your perspective. Encourage you guys to keep on talking about this stuff as well. I know you probably will anyway because you're passionate and driven. But we work in a remarkable industry that's got a challenge on its hand, and that challenge can be solved by those people who are, really passionate, driven, and knowledgeable about what's going on.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. Thanks for having us. And I think your summary there is just spot on. I think everyone's starting to, sing from the same sort of hymn book, and the chorus is getting louder and stronger. And just hopefully PREs have got their ears turned on, and I think we can, get through these tough times.
Yeah, great. And I really enjoyed it. Always enjoy the discussions and think that, your direct lines that you drew through sort of mega stables, mega breeders, it's all about everyone's diluting the product. And we really need to sort of bring back competition and healthy competition and thriving on that competition. And that's how the game was built, and that's how it should survive, going forward. So hopefully whoever is in charge of making the decisions understands that, the quick dollar is not always the best, especially for this sort of industry.
Thanks for joining us on Straight Talk, brought to you by our sponsors, Inglis and Darley. Don't forget to give us a rating wherever you're listening to us, be it on YouTube, Podbean, Apple, Spotify, wherever you find us. Be sure to subscribe. Send us an email at editor@thestraight.com.au and let us know what you're thinking and topics you might like us to cover. Thanks for joining us, and we'll talk to you again next week.